In this video, we're going to talk about service process design and in particular, how to think about co-production, which is a key aspect of service. So remember the basic definition of a process, a sequence of steps that depend on one another, transforming some inputs and actions into outputs that someone wants. What does it mean to be a service process? A service process involves co-production, literally producing together, activities or actions that are shared between different agents or actors. Recall the basics of service, represented here by Taboul's service triangle. There is the customer interacting with the firm and with the frontline employee. The essence of service is interaction. You order coffee, a person takes your order, and the barista makes it just for you. The coffee was produced by the joint actions of you, the counter person, and the coffee person together. We've seen how service blueprinting is one technique for characterizing and designing service processes, focusing mainly on exactly the customer and front stage interactions. You map the customer journey by considering what the customer has to do, the physical evidence the customer has, how the customer actions coordinate with front stage employee actions, and then what has to go on behind the scenes, on the backstage. Now we're going to look at a different way of mapping or diagramming or understanding business processes, or any processes really. Start with the notion of a process entity, a focal agent or actor or organization. The coffee house, the university, the barista, the professor. Any of these might be process entities because they can take action, perform process steps. Those process steps that the entity is a part of are the domain of the process entity. The coffee house sells the coffee, the barista brews the coffee, the university delivers education, the professor teaches, the professor also prepares lectures and grades assignments and meets with students. All of these actions, these steps the professor is involved with, is a part of, form the domain of the professor process. So let's go back to the pizza example. Consider a pizza restaurant as the focal process entity. Where I grew up, we called it a pizza place. Here are some of the process steps at the pizza place. Cooking pizza is only part of it. The customer has to tell you what kind of pizza to cook. You have to have a recipe for it. You have to have the ingredients on hand. The oven has to be hot, and so on. In this kind of diagram, the boxes represent process steps and the arrows, the lines connecting the boxes, represent dependencies between the steps. Now we've also put these boxes and arrows representing the process steps and dependencies into this little house-like shape. The different regions of this house represent different kinds of steps. The region at the edges of the house represents steps that involve the pizza place interacting directly with others. On the right, that's the customer, and on the left, that's the supplier. The critical interactions with the customer are to take the order and serve the pizza. The critical actions with the supplier are to set up a contract for supplies, ingredients, whatever, and to receive those supplies when they're delivered. Note that we're talking about these processes from the restaurant's perspective. The restaurant takes the order, the restaurant receives the supplies. It's not from the perspective of the customer or from the perspective of the supplier. Moving inward from the outside, the next region of the process domain is where the restaurant performs actions on behalf of or with resources or information gathered from customers or suppliers. On the right side, given information in the customer's order, the restaurant can actually make the pizza. On the left, given the contract and catalog from the suppliers, the restaurant can actually order supplies. This region of surrogate interaction does not really mean the pizza place is interacting with customers directly, but it means the pizza place couldn't do what it has to do without customer resources or customer information. Finally, in the middle, that's where the restaurant really gets to do its own thing, the region of independent processing. They take action, perform steps on their own resources, on their own stuff, with their own information. They've got their own recipes, their own pizza ovens, their own supplies. That's how we think about and diagram the process domain of the pizza place. There is stuff the pizza place does when interacting with others. There is stuff it does with resources and information it gets from others. There is stuff it does on its own with its own resources and information. Obviously, the more independent the processing, the more control you have over it. The customer could walk in and want anything on that pizza. The pizza place can only use the ingredients it has, but the customer could order anything. You have no control over the customer, really. You have control over the temperature of the oven. The closer you get to the center of the diagram, the more control you have. Now, the three regions of the process domain diagram are direct interaction, where the focal process entity has to work with others, surrogate interaction, where the focal entity uses resources or information gathered from others, and independent processing, where the entity takes action with its own resources. To summarize, Service processes are co-productive processes, processes that involve joint action between different entities. We've learned how process diagrams can help us unpack who does what by focusing on where direct interaction occurs, where surrogate interaction occurs, and where independent processing occurs across the process steps a specific entity is involved with. The more independent the processing, the more control you have.